Welcome. It's 6:30, so I'd like to get started, not take up any more of your precious time than necessary. Very pleased to have you here this evening. It's certainly a pleasure for me to get to do this event and to take a look back at the history department over the last 5 decades, and especially to hear from my colleagues who've retired and who have memories that go beyond my start time here. And I think especially for students now might find that particularly interesting. So I think you probably know the order of the evening, which is a slideshow, a trivia game with prizes, and I also want to welcome those who are tuned in to the Walter Stern Library YouTube channel, and hope you feel included. There's the trivia game. You can maybe play along at home, but there's a maximum of 20 who can play this for free. So we weren't going to shell out money to make it available to 300 people, and we really didn't need to. So those of you, I think there's not that many here, so we should be fine with that. After the trivia game, which is just 20 questions, we'll have the panelists up here, and I have some questions I'll pose to them. And then it'll be an open Q&A, so be thinking about things you might like to ask our panelists. And I do want to mention, I'll wait and mention that, I guess, and introduce the panelists when we get to that point. So Donato's going to start the slideshow, and sit back and enjoy. That was a bit of a stroll down memory lane, especially for some of us. Charles! So I want to thank Donato for putting that whole thing together, and if you would join me in just showing him how much we appreciate it. It was a labor of love, but he's so good at that, and I just kept sending pictures, and he just worked his magic, so thank you for that. And Donato, do you want to explain this thing? We have a quiz game through Kahoot. Yeah, so you have your phones. Yeah, so the first 20 who get on will play, and that includes, I guess, the home audience live streaming on the live stream. So, okay, and you can make up your own name if you want something really clever and creative. So, are more than 2 people going to play this fun game? Oh, look, it's taking off. Yeah, okay. Okay. There are prizes. Did I mention prizes? It's more than the pen I gave you when you came in. It's some pretty amazing stuff. And the first place finisher gets to pick the prize out of the 6 or 7 prizes we have over on this table. And yeah, second place gets to pick second, and so on till all the prizes are gone. So, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. I was 16. 17. Okay. Okay. All right, so is everybody who wants to play... No, Cleana's going to get on there, right? Oh, somebody dropped. Too frightening, huh? Is there anyone who... Yeah, there's a few more spots. Anyone who wants to play... 2 more spots. Okay, they're going fast. Going once, going twice, going... Did she get it? Cleana, did you get it? Okay. Okay. Someone's gone. We're back down to 18. Okay, wait. What number are we at? Wow, they're dropping like flies. I know it's terrifying. You might not be one of the prize winners, but I have more pens, so no one goes home a loser in this. Okay, so once Donato starts it, it'll all be obvious, and I can just sit down and... So that was fun. Lots of peanut gallery over here. So Giovanni, you get to pick whichever prize you would like. I must mention that maybe not so popular anymore would be the face mask, but 50th anniversary face mask, but there's also bamboo cutlery in the CSUB pouch. So just so you don't have to open it up. And then after we get second and third, Donato will hopefully tell us who fourth, fifth, and sixth were. 10, 9, 8. Oh, right. Okay. Okay. Eileen and Kat. I don't know, but oh, okay. Oh, you two played as a team. Okay, well, pick a prize. Go, go, go. I did? I guess we'll only need through 5. They played as a team, so it's 2 prizes. Okay. All right. And in third, and without hesitation. There's also a bucket hat with the new CSUB logo on it. Okay, John Maynard's book, Venice West. Nice choice. Okay, we still have 3 prizes left. So, are we able to determine who those are? Or do we just want to ask who feels like a winner? Kurt, Bob, and Andrea. Okay, so Kurt, take a shot at it. I know. I think I have 2 already. Okay. Allie, you missed it by that much. Missed it by that much. Oh, the bucket hat. The new logo. All right. So, Andrea. Is Andrea still here? Oh. Sorry, you get the consolation prize, the COVID mask, 50th anniversary logo. So stay safe. Okay, so while Donato shifts this over, I'd like to invite our panelists to come up to the podium. Hi, Charles. We'll we'll introduce you or let you introduce yourself in just a second. Cleana and Oliver will be here in a minute. Okay. So while they're taking their places, let me inform you that Jim George, who now you know was a historian who became provost, he was a founding member of the faculty here at CSUB, so it's really neat that we have had him in our department. He did spend a lot of time in administration, but then he came back into the department and taught half-time for 5 years on the faculty early retirement program, so we got to have him around a little bit more. Unfortunately, he and his wife traveled to Europe and got delayed over there, and they were to have landed at LAX about 5:30, if they were lucky, this evening. So that did not allow them to get back in time, and he was very disappointed. We're disappointed because we would love to have had him here. But we do have Jean Harry and Charles Litzinger. Okay, so they have microphones, and I'm going to let them introduce themselves. Well, I thought maybe you could say something like when you started and what years you were here teaching and what your field was, okay? And when Oliver gets back, he can do that. So we can maybe, are the mics on? I think so. So I know it's very cold in here. Sorry, there's something amiss with the HVAC. So we're sorry. That's why we have the doors open, because it's actually warmer outside than inside. So bundle up for this next portion of our event. And Oliver, if you want to start, you're actually the reigning member of the, as in senior member, yes. So if you could just, you can say your name if you want, but when you came, when you retired, and what your field was.
I'm Oliver Rink, and I came to Cal State Bakersfield without my PhD on the 4th chapter of my dissertation. And I had been in the United States about 6 months when I got this job interview up here. Is it not working?
Oh, so I need to turn on.
Well, that's a good thing.
It's on.
Hello? Oh, battery.
You want this one? Here, take this one.
Yeah, I think it's
This one works.
wow, Frank. You got one job.
Live by technology, die by technology.
Yeah, it says dead battery.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I still came here in 1975. That hasn't changed. And it was a part-time lecturer replacement job because I didn't have my PhD yet. And there had been a pretty bad experience with a previous member of the department who had been there 4 years and never completed the PhD and had to be let go, and it was nasty. So the first thing that the dean told me was, you have 6 months. It better be done by January of 1976. And I went down and defended my dissertation on January 5th, 1976. It's amazing what holding on to a job can do for incentive, right? And I drove up here. I was on what was once called the freeway flyer. I taught a course at Santa Monica City College in the morning and rode my motorcycle down to Santa Ana College and taught a course in the evening, dodging cars and riding between the lanes and doing all the things that make drivers hate motorcyclists. And my impressions of this place was, boy, it's a long ways out from the town. Stockdale Highway was a 2-lane road, and it was dusty, and there were no trees. And I got here and I thought, wow, this is someplace. And then I met the faculty, and I drove home at like 100 miles an hour to make my 6 o'clock class in Santa Ana, thinking, oh, I hope they hire me. Oh, I hope they hire me. And what I learned from that experience was that this was the best thing that ever happened to me. And I don't know what I would have done. I probably would have been on those freeways to this day. Long since dead as a motorcyclist, I'm sure. And you had asked us, what do I remember best from this place? Is that our students are heroic. Absolutely heroic. When we arrived, there hadn't been a 4-year college here ever. There was pent-up demand. Almost all my students were older than me. There were Vietnam vets who were still carrying the scars of that horrible war. And were not pleased with my long hair at first. And single mothers overcoming unbelievable odds to go to school. I had just come from a place that was filled with spoiled brats. I was working class, but you know, the University of Spoiled Children was not far off. I was an undergraduate there, so if you're an undergraduate there, there is that entitlement that, and I got up here and I thought, these are my people. And to this day, I still think this was a good career decision. I didn't always think that. But I think that's a good start. I retired in 2012.
I'm Jean Harry. Is it on? Okay, good. I came here in 1976, so a year after Oliver. Like Oliver. You want like that? Okay. Like Oliver, I had finished my dissertation in 1975, and so I got my PhD. And so I had, you know, basically that period of time in which I had to do something, you know, to pay my rent. And so I taught. I got a job actually through, no, that's not how it happened. Sorry, I got revision. That's another part of the story. I got a part-time temporary job at Cal Poly Pomona. And so I taught at 7 o'clock in the morning, and I lived in LA. So I commuted from LA, from West LA, to Pomona. I taught my classes, and then I would go back early enough, obviously, to beat the rush hour traffic. And it was great because I really didn't have that much teaching experience. As a TA, you really don't have the same kind of experience that you have, I think, when you are, actually teaching the classroom and totally responsible for everything that goes on there. And then I got the job here, and the reason why I got confused for a minute was because Homer Cheney, who was then chair of the Department of History, was an academic senator. And he knew somebody at Cal Poly named Gloria Lothrop, an American historian, and he said, well, we're looking for, a faculty member, and we'd really like a woman, I think because they were under pressure from the administration to hire a woman. And so she told me about it, I applied, and I got the job. So I started in 1976. My field is early modern European history, so I taught the Renaissance, the Reformation, 18th century, French Revolution. I also taught the Middle Ages, including the early Middle Ages until Miriam came, thank God that she came. And then I taught other courses as well. And then I retired in 2016, so I taught for 40 years.
Hi, I'm Cleona Murphy, and I came in 1988, and I was interviewed over the phone. I was in Dublin, sitting on the floor with all my notes around me. My baby was upstairs. I was afraid she was going to cry. I remember at that time I had done my PhD in upstate New York, but then I spent 3 years in London and a year in Dublin, but I really wanted to come back to the United States, and I sent lots of applications. And I remember the address of this one. I couldn't believe, I didn't know what it was. It was 9001 Stockdale Highway. And I thought, is it a house in a street? I couldn't visualize what kind of strange address is that. But they're the people who call me up. And I remember arriving, Oliver picked me up. He looked so young. He was the chair of the department. He was wearing a Hawaiian shirt and shorts. And then we met Nancy at the house, and she was all tanned. They'd just been back from windsurfing in Isabella. I think the next day it was 114 degrees. But it was hot. I didn't know what I'd come to. But I was really glad, just like Oliver, it completely changed my life. Sometimes people romanticize Ireland, and there's lots of things nice about it, but it's a very small country, and everybody knows everybody and their family, and you can never be yourself. And I came here and I was just myself, and they gave me every opportunity. So it was wonderful to come. I taught modern European history, so my courses went across Europe, not as far as Ukraine, unfortunately. But more specifically, I'm a British and Irish historian, and historian of women. And I retired 5 years ago, and I've been in this wonderful program, faculty or early retirement program, where you can teach up to half time for 5 years. And that's been a great way of easing out the place. So. Oh, yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Unfortunately, I cannot hear you. I get your very muffled sound. But so I knew that Oliver was speaking. I knew that Jean was speaking. And then the third speaker. Who? Oh, well, I figured it should be Cleona, but. And so I guess the question that we're answering is when we came to CSUB.
Yeah.
Before I do that, I wanted to hold this up. Can you see?
Oh my God.
It's the door card for Suite 304.
You're the one who stole that, right?
304F. And I want to remember all my suite mates, all of whom are now passed away. But I came there in 1984 in the spring on very soft money for 1 quarter. I'd been interviewed by Oliver and Ron Dolkart at the AHA convention the previous December, January in San Francisco, and then was offered the job for just one quarter, and Oliver said, you know, it was kind of an iffy thing, and it remained iffy for a couple years, actually, and then finally we got money for a tenure track job and another search, and then I was finally hired, I think, on hard money in 1986. Fred Dorr used to say there aren't any lines and there's no hard money, but in any case, it was a little shaky start. Oliver remembers that after that first quarter, I came in after they had offered me a contract for the next year, and told him that I wasn't going to take the contract. I was going back to Santa Barbara and be a beach bum. And he said, well, he understood, and it was hard, you know, the money wasn't very secure and all that kind of stuff. And so I gave him a letter resigning or not refusing the offer, and went off to Santa Barbara for the weekend. And during the weekend, I talked to, well, before I went, Stafford Betty took me to lunch, and we talked all afternoon. He said, well, you know, I have to admit that I invited you to lunch because I was going to try to convince you to stay, but I think you've convinced me that I should leave. And I said, oh, Stafford, I'm sorry I did that to you. And then I went to Santa Barbara and talked to some of my friends over there, Chinese friends, and they said, hey, you know, come on, it's not that difficult. You're being offered a job, and, you know, if anybody's going to be teaching Chinese history to big-nosed people, we think, if there's going to be a big-nosed person, we think you're the best big-nose we could put in there. So I thought it over, and I remember coming back over the grapevine and thinking, I'm going to go in there to Oliver on Monday and ask him to take back the letter, or, you know, I assumed he had sent it on to the dean. So I walked in there bright and early Monday morning, and he was smiling, and he said, I hope you're going to tell me what I think you're going to tell me. I said, what is that? He said, well, I think you're going to stay. And I said, yeah, what about the letter? And he opened the drawer of his desk and pulled out the letter and handed it to me. He hadn't sent it on to the dean. So 1984, and I'm the oldest, I think, on the panel by far here tonight, but I'm the least in service. And I have to congratulate and to thank all the other panelists I think served as chair for long periods of time, and I never did. I never took those responsibilities. And so the building up of the department and making it the very high quality department it is today is the accomplishment of the other people whom I share the stage with today.
Thank you, Charles. Can you hear me?
Yes, now I can.
Okay. And you retired in 2000, is that correct?
And I retired in 2000.
Right, with a mariachi band and everything, right? With a
Say that
mariachi band.
I can't.
We can't fix his sound. The farewell office hours, final office hours.
Oh,
with
yes,
the mariachi band.
Yeah, there was, I think one of the other questions you asked is considered was the greatest memory, and I think, ironically, it was my retirement office hours. Not for the reasons that I was leaving, but that it was just, it all came together very well, and the department surprised me by inviting the Mariachi San Marcos to provide music that afternoon, and that was a big surprise. And it was it was a very happy occasion. I think there was at least one picture in the slideshow from my final office hours.
Probably. Okay, thank you. I don't know if any of you who didn't address the first impression of CSUB or the History Department wants to say anything. If not, we can move
I
on.
will.
Yeah, okay. Jean?
Well, like Oliver said, when we first arrived, he in 75 and me in 76, this was a campus in the process of being built. It was still very remote. That Vaughn Shopping Center that's down at, California and Stockdale, that was really the edge of town pretty much, except for the Stockdale Country Club. And so this was really just farm country. And the campus had a lot of temporary buildings. The library at that point was what is now the education building, right? Yeah. And Faculty Towers was there. I remember that. But it was still very much a campus in the process of being built, of being developed. I think one of the things that really struck me, though, I was the first woman hired first woman faculty hired in the history department, and I was the only woman in the history department until Cleona came in 1988. So for 12 years, I was the only woman. And that was not unusual. I think one of the things that really struck me about the campus was how few female faculty there were. You could count them practically on one hand, maybe a little more than that, but there were not very many of us. Some had come as wives of men who were hired before them, and then there were some who were hired in their own right. And it's not that the wives were any less. They were often highly qualified PhDs and ultimately became extremely wonderful faculty members. But it was just striking, and we were told certain things. I mean, I remember that there was kind of an orientation in which the person conducting it said, don't wear pants, wear a skirt, that kind of thing. So we were supposed to conduct ourselves in a certain way. And the ironic thing was that, Oliver remembers the vets. I remember all these reentry students who were women. And many of them had started school at one point, perhaps at Bakersfield College or one of the other community colleges. They, for whatever reason, had dropped out. They got married, or they got pregnant, or they partied too hard, or whatever. And yet many of them really wanted a college degree. And when we opened our doors in 1970, we were just a wonderful opportunity for them. And so they came out because they had life experience. They were so dedicated, so disciplined, so eager to learn. Many of them were older than I. Oliver and I remember that, we looked like the students, the young students, because the demographic was so different then. And yet it was a wonderful experience, to be with those students, those female students who really, really wanted to learn. And I guess I was glad to be one of the few women role models on campus at the time. And I'll stop there.
I've forgotten what's the question.
It was about first impressions. You talked about 114 degrees and all of that, so I don't know if you want to add anything or
Well,
not.
I think I was very struck by the architecture. And in the years afterwards, when I was here, some faculty would put down the architecture, and I thought it was very interesting. I don't know what style it's called.
We called it late California Penal.
Okay.
Because I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but because some of it was still very temporary, and so some of the more recent buildings are much nicer in terms of architectural style. But anyway.
But it was beautiful. There were lovely creeping plants,
Yeah.
What was the one in Faculty Towers?
The wisteria.
The
The
wisteria
wisteria.
everywhere, and these big beams. It was just something like out of a movie to me. And I remember the first day Oliver took me to see the swimming pool, and an Olympic-sized swimming pool.
Yeah.
And he told me about the wrestling team, and I found that all very
How good
impressive.
we were.
Yeah. Well, the swim team too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And also struck by the students. A lot of them were older than me as well. And that was a little difficult. Sometimes I would get them coming to my office giving me advice. You know? So it was good then. It was good to get older. And then, of course, our demographics changed. But it was just like Oliver and Jean said, we had older students. And I often wondered why we didn't have younger students. And I was told that the students at the time in Bakersfield who could go to college tended to leave town. And then the demographics changed and we gradually got younger students. I was also telling Chris back there, when I came first, the cafeteria was a wonderful place. You know, it's been taken over by these corporations. Our cafeteria, it was, Carl, she was here too. It was a wonderful place. You go along, they have fabulous breakfast, you meet Homer Cheney or Oliver or Jean or Charles, and you sit down, students wander in, sit at the table with you. We'd have great chats. At lunch, think, oh, I'll go over to the cafeteria. You'd know who you'd end up with, at what table, students or faculty, and we'd have great discussions. And people didn't even have to buy food. I was going to say they brought their computers, but they didn't, because they didn't have computers then. But they brought their notebooks. And another wonderful place that we had a real pub. And I don't want to fall into the stereotype of the Irish person, because people often try and put me into it here. But we had a fantastic pub. It was over by the cafeteria. It was lined with books. It had a false fireplace, but it felt like one. And people, especially on Fridays, would go over the end of the week, students and faculties, chat and relax together. And that was got rid of. The cafeteria became, you know, controlled by these big corporations. And we knew the people who worked in the faculty, we knew the gardeners. It was like a little town. It was a whole life, you know. You didn't, when you got your paycheck at the end of the month, you wondered, how is this connected to what I'm doing?
Yeah, if I can just add to that, one of the things that really struck me about the campus was, again, it was small. There weren't that many students. And I knew every faculty member by name. I mean, you knew them by sight, you knew them by name, and you knew lots of students. You know, I began to reach a point toward the end of my 40-year career where I would think from one year to the next, how am I going to remember these, 60 students that I've got in this class? But initially it was really easy to do it, and some of them still are in contact with me, and that is just so wonderful to have those early students still in touch.
I would be remiss if I didn't point out that the one memory I have of this place is periodic budget crisis. The reason why the big gap between hiring Cleana and Jean, there were no hires at all in between them. We would have hired another woman. We would have hired anyone that would walk if we could have gotten, but there was no money. And then there was, you probably don't remember unless you're interested in California history, something called Proposition 13. And it passed by a huge amount, basically pushed by apartment owners. And what it did was to basically reduce property taxes all over the state and put all the funding on the state income tax for all the universities. And within 1 year, our budget, we lost 50% of our budget. I got a letter. In those days, we actually had to rank people for promotion. In my letter, I was ranked #1 for promotion and laid off in the same letter. I thought it was a good example of, carefully handling resources by doing it in one letter. One stamp, it wasn't even a stamp, it went by campus mail,
Yeah.
And there were several people whose careers were shortchanged, and I became an associate vice president for 4 years in the vice president's office before I could come back in to the history department. I had to come in back as chair, which I thought was a kind of torture. But from 3 of the best chairs we ever had are sitting right here, and I was one of the worst. So, but that's what I remember, budget crisis.
Charles, do you want to say anything about first impressions?
First impression. Well, as I said before, I had kind of a difficult transition from Santa Barbara to Bakersfield, and but thinking over preparing to talk tonight, I had a couple of interviews earlier that year. One for SUNY Genesee and one for North Carolina, Wilmington. And at those places, somebody in Asian history or Chinese history was going to have to teach practically all survey either of European history or American history, and then maybe every 2 or 3 years, if they build up enough interest, they might be able to have a course in, say, revolutionary China or something like that. And so I was very impressed when I first came that from the very beginning, they wanted me to introduce Chinese and Asian history into the curriculum, and that I would be doing. I would have to teach some surveys, but that most of my work would be in my field, and so I found that very enticing. And as time went on, I felt, a great deal of support throughout my career there to do my own thing, and whereas at these other places, I would have been, teaching mostly out of my field, out of my principal field anyway. So, and also the size of classes was smaller than I would have been facing other places, and I liked the idea that we had a lot of students who were the first in their families, the first generation of their families to attend college, and those things were very attractive to me, even though, as I said, my early years were not easy.
You discovered the swimming pool, though. That helped, right? You discovered the
That-
swimming pool.
I think the sound is picked up from the room, and it's just very muffled
Okay.
most of the time.
Okay. I have 5 more questions, but it's pushing 8 o'clock. So I think what would be maybe most beneficial, and especially for those of you who came out tonight, but also for those who are live streaming it. And I should mention that those who are on the live stream can put a question in the chat if they want, and we'll answer as many as we can. And if you had answers to questions I had sent you earlier and you want to squeeze those in there, you could probably find a way to do that. Yeah. So are there any questions for our panelists? Any burning things you're wondering about? You got one in the chat. Can you read it, or? Yeah. So do you need the mic? Okay. So, okay.
What's the attraction for?
Okay. What was the attraction for you to join such a young, remote university as your first job? Maureen rushed.
All right,
Sorry, Maureen. I had to do that.
I'll start on that one. It was an awful job market. It was just a horrible job market. And in the early 70s, mid 70s, I was even told by one of my advisors in my graduate program that he had just come back from the AHA, and the news was very, very grim at the AHA, that the job market was going to be horrible. And he was even saying, you might want to consider some other options, like, being a librarian, or perhaps, an archivist or something like that, which of course now you have to train specially for, but at the time I guess they took historians. And I didn't really want to do that. I figured I'd stick it out because you could never know what would happen. But there weren't that many jobs. The year I applied for this job, which I got in 1976, so it would have been 75, 76, I guess, that the application process would have been. I think there were maybe in early modern European history in the US, maybe 5 or 6 jobs. tenure track jobs. It was really, really sad. So
There were 3 in colonial American history in 1975.
yeah, and so this was as one of the professors I TA'd for said, this was a really good job, one of the best in the nation, because California paid well, it had good benefits, there was security, and it did not distinguish between men and women in terms of salary. There we go. I'm having so much trouble tonight in terms of salary. So it was a really good job, and I was thrilled to get it, I have to say. I'm sure you were too.
Well, it was that or Tulsa. With the praying hands. Yeah, it was, no. There were no other options.
I was a runner-up for the position in Hawaii.
Well, I'd been gone if that.
Runner-up.
Any other questions, or anybody else want to, let me give the...
Hi. This is for everyone, Charles included, if you can hear me. What's one piece of advice you'd give to brand new professors and teachers that you wished you would have known? I mean, it's a very generic question, but there's a lot of wisdom here, and there's a lot of teachers here. So what would you give your younger self or new teachers in the field? Advice.
Humility.
What do you think?
Humility.
Humility, yeah.
Just as a personal experience, I was probably the absolute worst teacher this university ever had in my first quarter. I had never taught any of the courses I was given. They didn't give me a survey, they gave me a graduate course and a senior course in colonial history and a senior level course in the American Revolution. And to me, the 18th century was like current events. I had lived literally the last 2 years in 17th century Dutch archives. So the Homer Cheney, who was the department chair, said, well, you can do a graduate course. You're in graduate school. Just do a graduate course. Well, I really hadn't been in a graduate course. I'd been overseas doing my dissertation, and the last graduate course I had was 18th century intellectual Puritan history. And so that's the course I gave them. 2 weeks into it, and John Maynard was in that course, by the way. 2 weeks into it, I had started out with 11. I had 4. And the department chair came in and talked me off the ledge and convinced the students that they shouldn't bring their torches and pitchforks. And so when I say humility, that's exactly what I mean. I had to learn to teach. I knew how to write. I knew how to do research. I had done the languages I needed to do. I really didn't know how to teach, and it took a while. And I would just say, be patient with yourself and be humble. Realize once you start teaching, the learning starts all over again. It's like getting another degree. It's a degree in teaching. You may know it, but teaching it's something else.
Totally. If I could add to that, Jeff, I think that one of the most, I think one of the most important things you can do is to recognize that it's not just you dispensing truth and wisdom to your students. It's you interacting with the students and respecting them, that you're in it together, that it's a partnership. And if you do that, then you're going to get a much better response from the students. You're going to learn a lot from them. And I always told my students that. They didn't always believe me because they had this idea that a professor has got all this wisdom and they're just there to write it all down. And that's just not the way learning happens. And so if you recognize that as a teacher or a professor, I think you'll go a lot farther in terms of engaging your students as well.
And admitting that you don't know everything.
Yeah.
And that you'll find it out. And when you see the eyes closing, that's time to stop the class. But I think the main thing, and I think you have it, is being passionate about what you're teaching. Then they pick it up. If you're bored with it, well, obviously you're going to be a very boring teacher. But loving it and trying to convey that to them, what interests you and what questions you are seeing arising, and what you can't figure out and perhaps they can figure out. Yeah.
Okay. Oh. Somebody named L.M. Moe has a question for Oliver.
Oh, boy.
What was your favorite course to teach?
Well, everyone probably knows that. I taught for 38 years with my good friend and brilliant biologist a course called Plagues and Peoples. And that is another example of something that was new here and special here. When I got here in the mid-'70s, they had something called the village requirement. Teachers, professors were actually made village fellows. They had offices in the dorms, and they had a group of students that they followed all the way through. And one of the requirements was a multidisciplinary course taught by 2 or more village fellows. And so Maynard Moe and I were playing billiards one day, and we came up with this course, and we taught it for 38 years. So, and hi, Maynard.
Okay. Any other questions, either from the live stream audience or from those of you here? Is that a... Okay. Yep.
I wanted to ask, how have you seen, you told us about how it was when you first got here, but how have you seen that change? Because you obviously saw, the expansion of the university, but, just kind of those ending experiences with your ending years when you retired.
Charles.
Excuse me.
Yeah.
I'll answer. One aspect in our discipline, it's changed tremendously for the students. When I first came, doing research for the students, really, the only way they could get at primary sources is when we had edited collections. There was nothing for them here on campus, or on most campuses. And there was no digital archives. And so two huge things happened that changed for our students is that we got the Historical Research Centre, so they could go in and look at old documents and talk to Chris and talk to Kurt and talk to Donato. And in fact, it was worked into our curriculum that they could have hands-on research. And also in our wider classes, they now have digital archives that they can use, and they can actually write more history and go to the sources and relook at sources that maybe other more privileged historians were able to travel to in Beijing or London or in Kenya, wherever. And this has made an enormous difference. They still need the skills, the writing skills and the thinking and critical skills to assess the documents, so they can actually get overwhelmed now what's available. But I think that has really changed the discipline. And I think also COVID has changed the discipline tremendously. I now have totally decided that the traditional exam in the classroom, where they have 2 or 3 hours to do it, is total waste of time. Because now information is available to people. And so give them a little bit longer and let them go to the sources, let them go to the books. They no longer have to remember everything. That's gone, it's past, and I think that has to be recognized by the universities.
competition with screens changed, and I was convinced, so attention spans got shorter. But I think students, you know, there's this great line in Goodbye, Mr. Chips, the great old book and film, and he's standing there and these young boys of this British finishing school are going by. He says, you know, it's just not fair. We keep getting older and they stay the same. And that's sort of the way I felt. That everything that was great about students was still great when I retired, and everything that annoyed me about students continued to annoy me at the end. So I would say there's a sameness about you guys.
But something has changed about how just the sheer size of the university and the sheer size of classes has changed the way in which we teach. I mean, when Oliver and I started, we had very small classes. I mean, sometimes like 4 in a graduate course. I mean,
Oh, yeah.
yeah, that would not happen today, I'm sure. You know, that few.
All our major courses were 25 or less.
Oh, yeah, and frequently much less than that, maybe 10 or 12 for some of the upper division, you know, specialty courses. And so when you've got 60 or 70 students in a class, it's really hard to get to know each student in the same way that you could learn a student's name and peculiarities or whatever when there were 25. And that makes it much more difficult. I mean, it's easier for them to be on their screens or to zone out or whatever. And so it becomes much more difficult, I think, to keep the students engaged when you've got so many students. And I think it's wonderful we have so many students, but it's unfortunate that, you know, we lost that kind of intimacy in the classroom. And I kind of am sad about that.
Charles, Donato put the question in the chat.
Yeah, he told me that what changes that you have seen over the years in university. Yeah. I remember early on in 1984, there was some question about whether I could get a typewriter. And I lobbied to get an IBM Selectric, and it never worked out. You know, by the time, so in those 17 years that I was there, the whole transformation of the way we did our work changed from typewriters to having computers, and then the change in the library. I mean, you know, we had card catalogs, and you went over there and went through, you know, in alphabetic order to get out your book and so forth, and to teach your students how to do all of that. And in that very short period of time, there was just revolutionary transformation about the way you did research and office work and so on. So it was very stark and noticeable.
If I could just and try to bring things to a close here and say that reminded me, Charles was the one who helped me set up email in about 1993, and he came over to my office and said blah, 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 blah. It was not very intuitive, at least not for me, and typed something like test, and then, you know, in his office, and then he came over and checked, and like it said, you know, it had come through, and then Roger and whatever. So, you know, I was in cyberspace at that point. It was all very new, and I even have a manual in my office because the historian in me likes to save artifacts, and it was all about the super internet highway or something, and all these things you do to get connected. So anyway, I wish we had a lot more time to hear from these guys and maybe an hour and a half was too short, but I also want to respect people's time, and it's after 8. So thank you so much for coming, and I want to again thank Donato. He did the Kahoot, he did the video, he's doing all this. Frank Aguirre did the equipment. Chris helped out with organizing this event. The dean obviously supportive of the Public History Institute, and especially our panelists who took time out of their lives to come and reminisce with us and share some of, as Jeff put it, their wisdom. So thanks so much for coming, and I'm sure if you have questions, well, I shouldn't say I'm sure, but if you have questions, they might be willing to entertain them individually up here. So thanks so much. Appreciate your coming.
Well, hi there. I just realized who you were, Carol. Good to see you.